Can you please take your seats so we can start? Not exactly in time, but at least not without too much delay. Welcome back. I hope you enjoyed your lunch and this morning's parallel sessions. I think it was very, very interesting so far. We had a good start of the conference. What we want to do with this panel session is to dig a little bit deeper into the barriers for the development and deployment and uptake of digital technologies in the social care sector. But before I present you the panel and our speaker, I would like to tell you a little bit more about what the EASPD activities are in this particular field. And I don't know whether you can put up my slides. Yes. So it won't take too much, but just to tell you a little bit more what EASPD is doing in this particular field and how you can join some of those activities. Next one, please. Oh, sorry, I have the pointer. First of all, within EASPD, we have a person-centered technology group, an interest group. And there are not a lot of members, but those that are there are quite competent. So it's a very good place to learn and to discuss your doubts and your issues. It's open to EASPD members only, I have to say, because it's one of the benefits of being a member of EASPD. We have regular meetings. There's a common work program made every year. And we're, I think, stimulated by the conference. We'll definitely also come up with proposals for a wider, let's say, knowledge transfer among the members of EASPD. There's an open meeting of that special interest group tomorrow night. I know that many of you probably won't be here anymore, but at least the members that attend the General Assembly and want to continue discussing also providing feedback on the conference and see what further can be done together. They're warmly invited to that meeting. But again, it's open also to others. Then you've heard it several times. EASPD is one of the co-founders of the Antelis network, together with two other European umbrella organizations. One is called AAATE, AAATE, which is the Association for the Advancement of Assistive Technology in Europe. And the other one is EVBB, which is a European umbrella body in the field of vocational training. And the idea behind the Antelis network is that nobody can solve these issues alone, so that it's important that both service providers and assistive technology experts and people in education work together. So it's a sort of a transversal special interest group between those three umbrella bodies. And again, members of any of those organizations can join that group for free and participate. The only thing is that it's based, replicating a little bit the model of the European Innovation Partnerships. I don't know whether you're familiar with that. It's based on the commitment of the members. So basically, at the beginning of the year, we make a work program and organizations contribute with either research or work in nature or contributions in kind, or work with studies that maybe they have to do anyway, but they just bring that into the network. So we develop together and we progress sort of in an integrated way. The network has also developed some tools. There's a self-assessment questionnaire for education providers to see how you're doing compared to introducing technology in your education. And there's a self-assessment framework for social care providers, which, by the way, was developed by HFT, by Sarah and Steve that you met this morning. And there's a survey into the gender and technology issues. Information about Antelis and about those tools you can find at the table in the corridor where you came in, and you can also get more information there and tonight at the network cocktail. Then the last project that sees EASPD involved is the PROACT project. Again, it has been mentioned. It is an attempt to explore the opportunities provided by digital technologies in fostering integrated care. The EASPD, of course, is not the technical partner, or we're basically involved in dissemination efforts like today, raising the subject also at this conference. And there's a specific task related to the development of a model on the transferability of what has been developed in one specific regional context to another. What are the factors that impact on the successful scaling up, but more than scaling up, transfer from one area to another. So I think it's a very challenging project. It still lasts at least 9 months. And there's a survey that we would like you to present, just a very rapid survey to get some basic information about the attitudes among social care providers towards these issues that you are invited to complete if you come tonight to the network cocktail. The network cocktail, which is kindly offered by the PROACT Consortium and the Antilles Network, will start at 5 o'clock. You might have found an invitation on the table. Otherwise, I suppose they still have them. It's in the same place where we had lunch and the coffee breaks. So immediately after the last sessions of this afternoon, you can come there, meet the people of PROACT, meet the people of Antilles, get a drink, and of course it's appreciated if you also take the opportunity to complete the survey, which won't take you more than 3 or 4 minutes. That's it. What I wanted to say about those involvement of EASPD in technology-oriented projects and activities. But over to our panel. This morning, different barriers were identified. Some related to technology or the technology in itself. The technological challenges, some related to education, some related to change in organizations, some barriers related to access to employment, etc., etc. And we want to go a little bit deeper into those with my 4 panelists that I very briefly ask to introduce themselves.
I'm Ulises Cortés. I'm Professor of Artificial Intelligence at Universidad Politécnica de Catalunya, and I'm also leading the High Performance Artificial Intelligence Group at the National Supercomputing Center of Spain. I've been working the last 20 years in creating AI tools for assistive technologies, basically for elders.
Good afternoon, this is Miguel Ángel Valero. I am the director of Ceapat. Ceapat is the Spanish reference center of personal autonomy and assistive technologies that belongs to the Spanish Ministry of Health and Wellness. Ceapat has been working for 30 years on providing the society with information, assessment, research, design, and many, many opportunities to enhance personal autonomy through accessible technology.
I'm Sarah Weston. I work for an organisation in the UK called HFT that provides social care support for adults with cognitive disabilities. And my team looks specifically at assistive technology and how we can use that to make people, enable them to do the things they want to do or be more independent.
Good afternoon. I am Klauss Candussi from Austria. I'm the co-founder of an organisation named atempo, which aim is to work towards inclusion of people with learning difficulties and disabilities, with a focus on working on the first labor market. We emphasize in our work to access to work training and education, on the other hand to accessible information and for access to a self-determined vote about the services people are cared.
My name is Maurice Gringberg, and I'm co-founder of Assist Foundation. Assistive Technologies is the full name. So this is the only foundation in Bulgaria promoting the usage of AT and tries to make it available, tries to raise awareness at all levels, from professionals, people with disabilities, to ministries and ministers, the importance. And so I'm here in my role of one of the people who worked on a project commissioned by EASPD on barriers of person-centered technologies. We were very happy to be selected because we were very much interested in the problems not only in Bulgaria but in Europe and in the world in general. Otherwise, I'm associate professor at the New Bulgaria University, director for usability lab to the Cognitive Science and Psychology Department of the university. Have been involved in many ICT projects, including cognitive modeling, AI, and so I'm really very interested to what is going to happen during this panel.
Okay, sorry. Thank you, Maurice. You already introduced a little bit the topic of your talk. The Assisted Foundation was invited by EASPD to deliver this survey, to do a survey on the barriers for the uptake of person-centered technology in Europe. And as an input for the discussion of this panel, we will hear about the results of that study. Maurice?
Okay, so as you see, the project is called Barriers to the Wider Development of Person-Centered Technologies for Persons with Disabilities. And in the idea of the project was also to find some facilitating factors to it. So it was a team of our foundation that basically did the project with the great support of the PCT group of EASPD and many other people. And the idea of this project was to kind of, after a literature review, to build a questionnaire which would inform more thoroughly about the barriers that exist for professionals working in social service providers. And so we started with a literature review and in a sense were kind of facilitated by the huge and great work that has been done before, because for us it was basically a work of systematizing all kind of sources, some of them also coming from the Entelis project. And so what we tried to add to this study was to group somehow the various barriers that were identified in the literature, that were suggested by members of the PCT group, by us to some extent, to group them in a way to be more able to figure out what the facilitating factors would be for them. And so you see these groups, which are, you see, so knowledge, skill, and training were grouped together, organizational barriers within the social service providers for people with disabilities, psychological barriers where we grouped motivation and attitudes, among others, policy barriers related to legislation, policies, budgets, and so on and so forth. Environment and technology, which are quite related concerning PCT, and barriers related to people with disabilities in their families. Although the questionnaire was aimed at professionals working in social services, the idea that the beneficiary of this work can be a kind of barrier in itself was also of interest to us. That's why this second group was included in the building of the questionnaire. So the questionnaire was built using the analysis of the groups of barriers that were identified. And in the beginning, we were very, very ambitious and hopeful that we'll gather sufficient data to make stable predictions and provide a good analysis of what is the situation right now. So the questionnaire was translated in 8 languages. It was deployed online in order to be administered more easily. But unfortunately, although a lot of effort was put to this, not many people participated in it. I think that maybe some of you know about this questionnaire because we sent emails using all possible mail lists that we could imagine at the time. But we couldn't gather enough data. Nevertheless, there were 137 participants from 18 countries, European countries, and in order to balance somehow the study and be able to draw some conclusions out of it, we tried to build 4 groups using just 100 participants. And you can see these groups, they're a little bit arbitrary, but nevertheless, we have a so-called the group called Central European Group, which involves Hungary, Croatia, and Poland. And here you can see the participation of the various countries. So Hungary was very active with the translation of the questionnaire and with participation. Then we have the Eastern European Group, it's Bulgaria. Not surprisingly, the most of the respondents are from Bulgaria, Latvia, and Romania, just one from each of these countries. And then the so-called Northern, but the right name would be West Northern Group, so countries where the development of PCT is to be expected to be larger. So this is the UK, 9%, Germany, France, Austria, Norway, Sweden, Denmark, Finland, and the Netherlands. And then the so-called Southern European Group, Spain, Greece, and Italy. So these are the groups that we have. And so the questionnaire, as I said, was based on the identified barriers. There were 15 of them. So this table is not meant to be read. It is just to give you an idea about some of the generalized data. You can find them on EASPD website, where the full deliverables of the projects are published and are available. So there is a lot of data, although just based on 100 participants. And you can see the relative numbers for these regions that we have identified. So in most of this information that I'm going to show you, a larger number means more severe barrier. So people asked most of the questions were based on a Likert 7-point scale. There was a kind of statement, and people had to, from 1 strongly disagree to 7 strongly agree with the statement. And the statement usually was a barrier. And in the case when it was not, it was inversed and is inversed here in order to have the right understanding of the data. So we start with data that are kind of more summarized in flavor. So the first one of the important questions is just a simple one that basically is kind of obvious. Do you think that technology is helpful for people with disabilities? And we are happy to see that the result is basically yes for all of the respondents, although it's not 7, which would be the maximum. So in this case, 7 is very, very helpful. So it is, you see, 6 point something, the average 6.4. Then this is the estimate. So I should have said that all this is based on estimates of the participants, although these are data that probably have some factual or statistical counterparts somewhere. This is not taken from such records. These are the impressions, the estimates of the people who participate. So this is important. So the second one is the average of good use of assistive technology in social service providers. So you see that here the numbers are not so large. So in general, the blue color means that larger means better in this case. So the good use, you see that is almost average. It's 4.3. So the helpfulness and usefulness of PCT seems obvious, but at the same time, we see that the good use is at a lower rate. So here you see the percentage of staff members using assistive technology in their work with the users of the social services. And here we see one big difference, which is interesting. for sure for us, coming from Bulgaria, it is that the Central, East, and Southern Europe, this number is about 22%, something like this. While for the so-called northern or west northern countries, it is 78%. So obviously there is a difference in the level of development of and the implementation of this technology in different regions in Europe. And then you see again the experts, the same difference. So a small number of experts, although this judgment, I think, is overestimated to some extent. And then this table is quite important because it will be related to our main conclusions about the main barriers. It is a table that summarizes results about the percentage of professionals with good knowledge in assistive technology or in person-centered technologies. So you see that the estimates are about 30%. Which by itself is kind of alarming. One would have expected more. But the second and third column with the numbers basically shows the number of training courses that are provided. So the first, actually the second or the third column in the table is related to the training courses that are provided during university or any basic education. And so you see that in some regions it is less than 1 per person. So the numbers, for instance, 0.5 means that 1 person in 2 got such a course during their university studies. And then you see on the job training, where the situation is a little bit better, but still people who were interviewed, respondents, some of them, so the average number of courses they have had in their careers is 2, maybe 2 to 3, while in the west northern regions of Europe it's 16. So this is again a huge gap, and still you see that the percentage of people who have good knowledge in PCT is about 30%. So in the report of the data you can find data about all the questions that have been asked. And plots like this one, which is of course not to be read here, it is just to show this is a ranking of the 15 barriers that were identified, with the most severe one at the top and the less severe one at the bottom. And some of them are not barriers because you see that some of the ratings are about 1 or 2, which means that they are not real barriers. And so in order to get really something out of this study, we grouped this data into basically averages about all respondents, all the responses that were given, and ranked them because the individual differences were just about West Northern Europe, where some of the most severe barriers had changed places, and all the others had the same. So in general, we decided to aggregate the data. And so here you see these 15 barriers, and now I'll basically take the ones that are related to rankings above the average. So the average is I agree and disagree, or it's either one of them. So people are not really, haven't decided if it's a real barrier, so they hesitate in a sense. So we have taken only when the ranking is above 4, which means that the average kind of points to a barrier. And here are these main barriers identified by the study. So the first one is the financial barrier, which is not surprising, although for West Northern country it is not the first one, it is not the most severe one. But for the other 3 regions it is the most severe one. And then you see what to some extent was surprising for us, because we more or less realized that training is really very important in Bulgaria, but also thought that maybe this is a problem in Bulgaria where person-centered technologies are not used in general. They are used very rarely in general. So training barriers seems to be very important. Then you have the qualified personnel barriers, which is related, of course, to training. And these first 3 barriers are basically undistinguishable, and the ratings there are about 5.5. The maximum is 7, I remind you. So in a sense, this is the main group of barriers, and the second and the third, training and qualified personnel, seem to be the most severe one, apart from the financial barrier. And then you see that you have resource barriers, of course, And then something that is also interesting is the people with disabilities and their families' knowledge about PCT barrier. So it means that even if professionals have the goodwill and want to make people with disabilities make best usage of PCT, it's very difficult for the families and the people with disabilities to learn how to use this technology. And so for many of the professionals, this is quite an important barrier, which also should be considered. And then we have the environmental barriers, which are more or less kind of natural here. And we have also the legislation and regulation barriers, which also is something that is kind of... So just to summarize once again, for us at least, the main conclusion, the most important barrier that has to be overcome is the barrier related to education, to training, and of the professional in different ways. So first of all, during their university studies. And of course, I won't say something new to you, but part of these problems is related just to computer literacy. It's not related to a problem related to specifically to assistive technology. So people have a huge gap between what they know, how to use a computer, and also what they know about the advantages of using a computer, and working with sophisticated or advanced PCT technologies in order to train or make them available to people with disabilities. So it is really a big question. And the second problem or barrier follows from it. It is a lack of qualified professionals in the field, insufficient financing, lack of resources, and lack of needed competencies among people with disabilities, which raises the usability or user experience issues about the barriers in this type of field. So I want to thank you, first of all, the organizers for inviting us, and me in particular. And here are the people who actually participated and without whom this data, although scarce, couldn't have been gathered. So in a sense, we consider that this study is a good first step. The questionnaire is developed. Of course, it can be done better. So it's a kind of, if anybody is interested in continuing with this type of information to make it more useful for all of you and for all of the policymakers and everybody interested, I'm open to discussing it because a huge amount of work has been input there. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Maurice. Thank you, Maurice, for your presentation, which was very nice and clear. I would like to ask my panelists, and I will start with Sarah, to comment a little bit on those figures, and especially from her perspective as a social care provider, but also organization which is very advanced in introducing technology in their service delivery model and in supporting their clients. And maybe you can focus a little bit on your comments on that aspect, that the lack of training among staff is one of the major barriers.
Thank you. Yeah, I think there is a huge issue with training. The biggest issue of that being there isn't any. I've worked in assistive technology for 4 or 5 years. I have no qualifications in it, and neither do any of my team, because there just isn't any available. I think probably related to that, though, or certainly one of the biggest barriers I feel there is to technology is knowledge of what's out there and how to get hold of it. In the UK, that is complicated, and there's nowhere to go for people to be able to get that information and the knowledge that they need. And in addition, I think commissioning and funding structures, certainly in the UK, make things really quite difficult, and that's the same for training. It's the same for getting hold of technology. Nobody seems to want to pay for it, and so that leaves organisations like mine having to find funds to do that.
Okay, thank you. And Klauss, your organisation is actively supporting young people with disabilities in developing their digital skills, for example, and getting into jobs. Can you comment on those figures? Because it was one of the barriers identified as well, lack of digital skills.
Yeah, I was quite surprised by the high estimation about the helpfulness of ICT. Very high ranking. Why was surprised? Because it conflicts with our daily experience. My organization is delivering ICT for inclusion trainings for staff and for people with disabilities in many European countries. And what we face there is not only a lack of competence, but a problem behind, and that's the problem of attitude. In our recognition, ICT often is seen as a dangerous world. And I get a real déjà vu feeling. When I started working in the disability field, staff held people in institutions to protect them against the dangerous world outside. And it's quite the same now. Staff has the impression to have to protect, the duty to protect people against the dangerous world of ICT. Recently I was in Germany and I was told that nearly half of the residential services for people with learning difficulties don't offer wireless access to internet for their service users. And the bullshit argument was it was for data protection reasons. So it's, of course, no fact-based argument. It's the attitude behind. And I wonder about, I'm from Austria. Austria is a country with high mountains, you know, and it's dangerous to climb mountains. But no one would have the idea to forbid you, coming from the flat countries, the Netherlands, for instance, to make your holidays in Austria. Our Alpenverein, our mountaineering clubs is marking paths, is building mountain shelters, training courses. That's the role of the social organizations. We should be the Alpenverein for the digital world for people with disabilities.
Okay, thank you. So, yeah, that's a good point, especially the one on the attitude. So it's not only about competency, but behind that there's even, let's say, a barrier behind it, which is related to the attitude of people and the expectations. And the cultural model probably also, which is behind the whole thinking around disability. Miguel, something about policy and the lack of legislation and regulatory framework was mentioned. You represent a national assistive technology center very close to the government, the Ministry of Labor, if I'm well informed. Is that really a problem? Is there a lack of legislation in a country like Spain? Sorry.
Not at all. It's true, legislation can always be improved, but Spain is probably one of the countries that has more legislation, national and regional legislation dealing with accessibility, disability, elderly people, and so on. The challenge is to fulfill that legislation, because many times we have a lot of laws, very old laws, and some of them are not always prosecuted. So public or private entities do not fulfill the legislation in terms of physical accessibility or sensorial accessibility or cognitive accessibility, and things take too much time to be solved. Thanks to legislation, we have a lot of advances and many things, and I think that this legislation is quite reasonable and properly established for everybody. The point are the execution bodies, so that this legislation is really converted into real actions.
And who should do more then? Is it the disabled people's organizations that should put more pressure, or is it the institutions that should adopt this legislation more clearly?
We everybody have a role, starting from the citizens, that they should demand more and more fulfillment of the legislation. For example, give you an example. If you are a person with a disability in Spain and you have an accessibility problem in your house, there is a law that, depending on the cost, on the improvement of the accessibility barrier, you have a right to get that problem to be solved. And many citizens do not do it. The third sector, the associations, they put a lot of efforts to ask for more and more support, and they get it little by little. And the public, and I mean national and regional bodies, they try to do a little more and more, but they do not go further as much as desired. So I think that everybody have a different role, including the universities and the private companies, because everybody have a role to show how we do the job that must be done among everybody.
Okay, thank you, Miguel. That's very clear. Ulises, what struck me was that let's say the level of technology was never mentioned as being sort of a barrier. Does it mean that all problems are solved? Is it not necessary anymore to do research into the development of new solutions?
Well, I have to say two things. I really like your metaphor about the mountains, because technology is about mountains. But on the contrary of physical mountains, technology is a mountain that grows every year. It's supposed to be easier, but every time you are adding new technologies, so you integrate new technologies, so the technology is more complicated all the time. You can rely with the old technology that is there, so maybe it's easy to understand, or you can train people to use that technology. But it's very fast, the way technology is changing. So the problem is the pace of change in technology. Back in 2000, when I started thinking about assistive technologies, I decided to make a conference, first conference on assistive technology in the artificial intelligence sector here in Barcelona. And I used as a reference my PhD advisor, that at the time he was 50. And I told, well, basically the idea that we want to build is in 15 years is to have a technology that will support you as an elder. And he was mad at me. During 5 years, he was not talking to me because I was telling him that he will be old and he will be needing technology to support his life. But basically now he's 68, basically, and he starts using the technology. And he's a professor of artificial intelligence. But the technology he requires is very complicated. He needs the ultimate thing. But if you think in the average people, the technology they need is not the one that we are generating at the universities. That is very complex. It's like going to the moon. But maybe it's not the one you need. But the vendors will like to have that technology because it's more attractive than a simple technology. And that's the main issue. We are producing a lot of technology to solve problems that do not exist or maybe are existing. And we want to sell that. But we are not training the people to get in shape. And the other thing that regarding the law that is very interesting is I'm teaching the ethics course on artificial intelligence at the university. Ethics and artificial intelligence. And the second class was 2 weeks ago. And I asked the students, mostly there are 15 students for all over Europe, only 2 Catalans. Right? So I asked the following questions. Have you ever read the Constitution of your country? Have you ever read the law? Do you know any ruling structure? Do you know the moral of your religion, the 10 Commandments? And the answers are no, 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 no. So even if you have a very nice legislation, as he says that in Spain exists, no one is able to use it because they don't know anything about rights, they don't know anything about obligations. So also there is no money to make this articulation. But that's the main issue. No one knows. So why we are asking people to use technology if they don't know their rights, not their obligations?
Right. Thank you for that comment. I also asked the panelists not only to feedback on this study, but also to bring an example of a challenge that they and the organizations have addressed in this field. And I'd like to start with Sarah. I suppose you have 1 or 2 slides. Can you briefly explain what it is about?
Yes, so this is about how we've overcome a few barriers to technology within HFT, within my organisation. We're very lucky that we have a team that looks at technology. That's what we do all day, every day, and we don't, that's our focus. But in some ways, it means it can be overlooked as being part of every day. And probably some of our biggest barriers are around staff and their anxieties around technology. There's still a big perception that I think they think they're going to lose their jobs because of technology. Why they would think that when we have a utter crisis in social care recruitment that a bit of technology is going to make them lose their jobs, I don't know, but they do. So this is a small example about how we overcame some of those challenges. So we have a service in the Midlands in England with people with very complex needs. Their main challenges are communication skills, and they have lack of independence because they have cognitive disabilities, but they have very complex physical needs as well. So technology was identified as a solution that could help. But we had a little bit of a journey with staff. They were scared of it. There was no training for them to do in it other than what was internal, which we do a lot of. And they underestimated people's abilities quite seriously. So we did a lot of training with them internally, and then we did some more training because we had to really get them to understand what the impact could be, and then it was okay if we got it wrong sometimes. So we did a lot of trial and error, a lot of, well, this might work, okay, it doesn't, let's try something else. You should never be afraid to try with technology. And the manager in the service, by her own admission, I have a very short clip of her speaking in a minute, she went into it with the wrong attitude. She said, I didn't think it was going to work. But because of the perseverance of the team, they kept going in, they didn't give up. We were able to overcome those barriers. Now, I'm hoping... Right, there should be I don't think I can play, or can I? Let's try. You can do it.
We had a project set up, and at the beginning, I have to say, we were quite negative, I think, at the beginning. We couldn't really envisage some of the technology working. I think I was probably a bit, we'll give it a go, but I'll let you know it won't work. But actually, I think I gave it a go. I thought, oh, give it a go. But actually, that didn't work. But if it was like this, it would.
So we did a lot of training and a lot of awareness raising with that staff team. And all the training we can do with them, though, is internal. We can't offer them any more money. We can't offer them any incentives to take responsibility for technology. And if you don't have your staff on board, if they haven't bought into the technology, it won't work because they are so key to making it work. So we thought, well, we can't offer people any more money, and there is no training. So what can we do? So there's very little accredited training, and staff don't have time to do it. So what did? We came up with we made our own training. So we've got 2 units that are accredited at level 2 in the UK, which is the level that most support staff have of education. And it's been trialled by some of our staff. They've got an enormous amount out of it. They can add that to their CV. So they've got a qualification to show for it. But it also gave them confidence to actually think, well, actually, this bit of technology is not working. Is it just a low battery? I can have a look at that. I can see whether that is something I can fix. It empowered quite a lot of people to be able to do that. And it's also being piloted by a local college in the southwest. And our second sort of way of overcoming the training barrier was to be a partner in AIAS, which stands for Assisted Living Training and Skills, which was a Erasmus Plus funded project that has just finished. And out of that has come 2 accredited units, accredited units as part of degrees in the UK and in Denmark, some e-learning in Norway and Spain. And in the UK, this project continues because we're looking at developing a full qualification for social care staff. So I suppose, in summary, to sort of overcome those barriers, it's about communication. It's about working in partnership. I can't do it all on my own, but I found a group of people who could help me, and we did that between us. That's me.
Fantastic. Yeah, give her an applause. It's amazing. That's what you can do if you don't find the resources. You just make them yourself, and this is a great example. I'm sure more people would like to learn more from Sarah later during the coffee break, and maybe get access to those training courses if possible. I apologize with the technical guys because I slightly changed the order. I pass the floor now to Klauss, who will present us how they addressed one of the challenges that they were facing.
Yeah. I know this panel is announced as a technical session, but let me start with an absolutely non-technical question. It's the question about the why. Why do we, since many years now, work towards easy, comprehensive information? When I started my work in the disability field long ago, service users were not asked whether they would like tea or coffee in the morning. Staff made a decision, because people with learning difficulties were not even considered to make self-determined decisions. And yes, I think, I know that things have changed meanwhile, but in our daily life, I see many remaining obstacles against the right for self-determination. And one of the most effective obstacles hereby is the lack of understandable information. There is no way to make good decisions without proper information. I'm sure everybody here knows problems like this on my slide. The package inside of a medicine is printed in tiny characters and full of medical terms. A notification of your authority tells you nothing useful. And quality media might be helpful to make good political decisions, but only for advanced readers. I guess I can stop here. Altogether, no proper basis for decisions, for good decisions and inclusion. Information in easy-to-read style is the well-known solution for that problem, very often coming as an extra brochure for the disabled, which means extra costs for the sender. Two other problems. If there is only one very easy version of the information, people might find it too simple or even childish. And if there are different versions available, the sender has a tricky problem to decide who will get which one, the normal one, and you, the easy version. But I ask you, who knows best which was the proper version for you? Yeah, of course, it's you, yourself. So that's why we tried to see how technology could help to hand over the decision from the senders to the receivers of information, and we developed the Capito app. This tiny sign, this QR code, makes the big difference. It comes with the normal information on leaflets, newspapers, or whatever. And it is the key. Scanning this code with your mobile, after having downloaded the Capito app for free, it instantly brings the information on your smartphone. And now you select the proper way how to consume it. You see it in the right corner, in the right lower corner. You can decide if you want to listen to it via the read aloud service, or watch the sign language video, or to read it on your preferred language level. Because the Capito app normally provides information on the original level and 3 different easy-to-read levels. the decision, what you like best. It's up to you. And nobody could blame you if you go for the version for the dummies. The Capito app actually is used for product information, for safety instructions, contracts, for instance, contracts for the service users of social services. But it's also used for the daily top easy news of the Austrian press agency, for legal notifications. And in museums and exhibitions, the Capito app transfers your mobile into the new generation of audio guides. Yeah, for those who want more information, I would have leaflets with me, but Lufthansa didn't up to now deliver my baggage. So I hope I will be able to serve with it in the evening or even tomorrow. If you're interested, you can try out the app. Feel free to come to me and try it out in the break or in the evening. And if you like our vision, imagine a world where everybody can understand everything, then we would be very much welcome you to join us and cooperate with Capito.
Thank you. Fantastic. Thank you very much, Klauss. That is definitely an incredible, useful app, and I think it's useful for many people, not only for people with disabilities. Thank you very much for giving that insight into how technology can help to allow for access to information. Miguel, you brought a good practice as well, right?
Thank you. Right. Well, as further to your request, we thought about two approaches to policy barriers for the uptake of assistive technology in the care sector, as you all can see in the slide. In the next slide, I will, thank you. It's assistive technologies. You can see the first one we chose, and to be honest, I had not read before the report, were economical barriers. Just to outline the issue, we are looking forward to affordable technology for all. People cannot afford some assistive devices and services that can undoubtedly promote their personal autonomy. And this is an economical barrier that also has a strong relation with policies. So it's, let's say, a legislation, an economical or financial barrier. So 5 things we have put into stage along these last years in Ceapat, belonging to the Spanish government. The first one that I think is very important to mention is the promotion of low-cost assistive technology. We organize every year, we have been organizing for 11 years, a national event dealing with low-cost assistive technologies. So people with disabilities and the families and the professionals come to that international conference and they learn to do low-cost assistive technology that is not really competing with the industry, but is also opening the way for many, many people in a very open knowledge approach. We have a catalog of about 400 low-cost assistive technologies. And low cost is not low quality. Okay? Low cost are with a reasonable cost that could be used, that has proper materials and has been validated by the people. Second issue is providing more and more information about public funding. That's another part and role of Ceapat. Even though we are a technical center, we also provide the society with information about public funding for assistive technologies. That is something very complex, taking into account the diversity of the regions along the Spanish geography. We also did a list of some entities, Spanish entities, that work on reutilization and recycling of assistive technologies. Because many people come to Ceapat asking for that very expensive wheelchair, and we know that maybe you cannot afford it or the funding will come in months, And there are some entities that are also working on reutilization and recycling, and all the information is in Ceapat webpage. Fourth, excuse me if I say good practice, I'm just sharing this for everybody, if it's useful for other people, is the reduction of taxes. That is also that has been hard in Spain, but we are also fighting in cooperation with the associative sector to reduce the taxes of some assistive technologies that should have low tax, and they don't still have them. This is also a European issue. And finally, solidarity. I think that's also something very important, because many times we know other NGOs and institutions, for example, like the Red Cross Society, that also has some banks of assistive technologies for very vulnerable people. So that's one approach to overcome the economical barriers. The mission are affordable technology for all. As you ask us for at least 2 use cases, the second use case, as you can see, is the information challenge. We talk about barriers, now we should talk about information. That's also part of a national and regional policy from our point of view. Citizens and professionals ignore the existence and features of many assistive devices. I did not also read the report before writing this, but it's also connected, as the professor from Bulgaria showed to us. We established about 15 years ago, more or less, an information system about assistive technology in Spain. It has about 4,000 assistive devices, and that's open through the Ceapat webpage. And so many people can consult about this information, and professionals in Ceapat devote part of their time to update this national catalog that is also hardly connected with the European one. Second, we also focus on a public network of available professionals. Ceapat has their own professionals to give free assessment about assistive technologies, but we coordinate a national network, so depending on the region in Spain, we know about private or public entities that have professionals, occupational therapists mainly, or speech therapists, or engineers, technicians, that know about this kind of products. We publish very frequently updated leaflets for everybody, talking on different groups of assistive technologies. According to the information we gather from the society, because we give support to about 5,000 people and entities per year, more or less, we publish these updated leaflets because we know that technology changes and people is not always updated. We also organize seminars and conferences. Every year we organize the international conference in Ceapat, the International Ceapat Week, and everything is in internet, so you can consult all the information. And finally, open mind, because information is for everybody if we share information and if people looks for information. It's a two-way approach. So just an outline, known technology for all. You can see here in this very last slide one of the millions of citizens that are waiting for us for affordable and well-known assistive technology. Thank you.
Thank you, Miguel. Very precious work you're doing there. Thank you for overcoming economic and information barriers. Ulises doesn't have a presentation. Maybe you can tell us rather briefly, because I would leave at least some minutes for the discussion, some experience from your research background of how you successfully addressed the challenge.
Well, basically, I've been dealing in creating technologies that are on the edge. We've been creating wheelchairs that are holonomic. That means that they don't use wheels, but they move on spheres, so they can rotate in themselves. We are creating rollators that can support the user, having an electric engine in each one of the wheels. We have sensors. We are creating interfaces. But the main question is not the creation of the technology. The technology is there. I don't believe that these kind of technologies will be cheap. They are not cheap. They have to be on the appropriate price, and someone has to produce it. The worst scenario one can imagine is the one we have. We create magnificent products that are never produced in Europe. All the products that we produce using European funds are look to be produced either in China or elsewhere, because there is no social services that will be willing to develop those and sell it in Europe, because the market is so captive that no one will use this technology that is on the edge. That's one of the main issues. We have to reshape the way we are creating the technology. These walkers we presented in Galicia, and one of the mayors of the cities told me, I will buy 5,000 of those if you convince the local government in Galicia to pave all the streets. Because if you have electric rollators, you cannot walk in stone-based streets. So we are creating all these technologies, but we don't have cities that are affordable for citizens that are getting old and older and older and older, and you need more and more interaction with the city. So no one is thinking that you should adapt the whole ecosystem. You may have houses as the one you presented that are very interesting for people that is living in that environment, but what we want is to have elders that are aging in the cities and keep active in the cities. So then you have to reshape the whole city. When I was younger, that means 15 years ago, I came to these meetings and I asked all the persons over 45, how many of you already started to modify your houses because you are elder and you have to be aware that you are in danger because you are not the appropriate houses. We are still having architects that build houses to stay there hundreds of years, but they are not thinking in the people that will live in there more than 30 years. So we have to make another change in the culture of the way we are using technology, because the pace of technology is exponential. We can integrate more and more technology, will be more expensive, more proficient, but cannot be used by people because there is no space to use it.
Yeah, thank you for that, Ulises. Those are very valuable remarks, especially by bringing also back the environmental aspect into the discussion. How sometimes the technology just cannot function because the environment is not sufficiently adapted, and at the same time the problem of the technology transfer. Too much technology as outcome of research projects in Europe remains in the lab, and sometimes the causes of that is also related to the lack of involvement of potential users of that technology right from the start. But even that is not always a guarantee if the approach is not correct, to invest money where you can have the highest impact compared to what you invest. And I totally agree with that point. Okay, we still have 10 minutes. I take some minutes, 3 minutes from the coffee break. Are there questions in the room? Yes. Is there a mic? Oh, it's you, Steve. Well, then someone else.
One's a comment, one's a question. Hello. I take the point, my son is in a wheelchair and I know all about the environment. Doesn't stop us trying, however. But the question I want to ask really is to Sarah, and I probably know the answer, but I want to ask anyway, is about incentives. Because we had, Miguel, you were saying that there's legislation in Spain, but it doesn't actually get enforced. And I think it will only get enforced when there are incentives to make people do it. So, Sarah, why is social care not biting your hand off to use technology more?
Well, that's a nice, easy question. Thank you, Steve. I don't think enough people know enough about it. I said this earlier. I think one of the biggest barriers to technology is knowing what's available and knowing how to get hold of it. And there isn't a single source to do that. I was at an event in London a couple of months ago, and local authorities, social care, they are crying out for someone to say, right, do this with it. You know, where can we find this information? And I think they need a credible source of information to be able to do that. That, and people are scared of getting it wrong. And that would probably be one of my takeaway messages. Don't be afraid of getting it wrong. It's okay to get it wrong because we do it all the time.
Yep. You want to say?
Yes, thanks. Just incentives help and fines too.
Fines, yeah. Some other questions from the audience? Yes, the gentleman over there.
Hello, my name is Matthias Schneider. I'm representing ETSI here, the Technical Committee Human Factors. I have one point that I thought interesting because it hasn't been mentioned here. I believe that in many cases the normal technology development is too fast, which means we are solving problems for people who have accessibility needs with the solutions of yesterday, and as they get ready to be implemented and to be used, the standard technology has gone one step further. One example is real-time texting, which is interesting, and people are discussing that over and over again. But when we finally find a solution to do real-time texting, I'm pretty sure that solutions like WhatsApp will have solved that problem long ago, and most users will use this. So one point is that the missing information, both on the accessibility technology side and on the user side, might lead to solutions which simply come always a few years too late. And legislation is actually supporting that wrong approach.
Thank you. Ulises, can you?
Yes. So basically, there is one thing that we have to think. The legislator is not doing the work. And it's not doing the work because they don't understand and they don't follow the developments. So you have products that are out of the shelf before the legislator is there. So no one has a reflection of why you are doing this. Or there is no an harmonization on the research one doing in the universities or the companies. And there is really a push to bring new products. So why we have a new iPhone every 6 months or 8 months? It's not needed. So just to give you an idea, if you have an iPhone on hand, this is more powerful in computing than the most powerful supercomputer 10 years ago. But it's almost 10,000 most powerful as the computer that put the man on the moon. So really, do you need it just to text and make photos? So the same happens with any kind of technology. It's just the push to have something new. And you're right, but it's the legislator, sorry, Miguel, that is not doing the job. And is not doing the job because they are not reflecting on the impact of the technology in society.
And it's getting faster and faster, right? The development. You want to come in?
Yeah. Just very short comment. Thanks for the comment. Legislation relies very much on standardization too, as we know. So if we have good standardization, legislation can say, do the things in that way, according to that standard. And this is another very important point to be taken into account.
I just want to add something to both questions. In my opinion, in my relatively short experience in the field, and although it kind of sounds a little bit too high level of reasoning, the models of disability which have been mentioned are an important issue in policy making. Because the medical model, the social model, the human rights model, and so on and so forth, have been developed and put forward, but I'm not sure that all policymakers really endorse them. And I think that, at least based on what I have read, it's not actually commonly endorsed in general. So whenever, for instance, we ask our students in speech therapy, when we want to promote assistive technologies, when they ask the regular questions, isn't it too expensive? in order to think about it, and then isn't it bad for the eyes, and so on and so forth. And so we asked them, isn't it bad to have a GSM, a personal smartphone? Is it good or not? And they say, of course, you cannot live without such a device. And then I'm saying, okay, but if you take these 4 devices around you, you can afford an assistive technology device. And they say, yeah, but it is not worthwhile because these people probably wouldn't be able to use them, and so on and so forth. So I think that part of this legislation stuff is really some hidden, or maybe not so hidden, maybe medical model or other type of model of disability, and that it's part of the questionnaire when some people maybe implicitly, not explicitly think, okay, but is it worth the effort, the money, the changing of the urban situation, just for people who probably won't do as other people will do. And I think that this is something to be made explicitly in order to be able to try to solve these problems. Otherwise, this is always there, although the reasons usually are financial or others. Actually, is it worthwhile doing such an effort? And I think that this is the important answer why highest-end technology are not used specifically for people with disabilities. I always quote in some of my presentations Stephen Hawking, who passed away, was saying that the disabilities of today, people with disabilities, with technology will become super abilities. And so this is something that should be the goal of a policy, to actually all this industry of ICT industry to be aimed at providing devices and technology for people with disabilities, because maybe they will be the future transhumans and the first one to test this technology. But of course, it requires a lot of investment, a lot of funding, and really a clear plan for doing so. And I think this is the major problem.
Okay. Thank you, Maurice. I suppose some of the people in the audience will be happy to discuss that further with you, because there were some interesting views there. Klauss, a final comment from your side? No? Okay. So then before we give them an applause, the panel, I have to tell you that the buses will leave at 6:15 for the gala dinner tonight outside the building. And the most important thing is that you take your badge. Otherwise you won't get food or entrance, I don't know. Anyway, your badge is essential. So now it's time for the coffee break, and thank you very much for attending this session.